Welcome everyone to the event today on the Socio, which is a culmination of a year-long first year of the School of Questioning. First, some announcements. The event will be as follows. I will introduce. Roy will give a talk, which will be short, I'm told, on the Socio. That will be followed by me just for 5 or 10 minutes, just as to get into the mood, questioning him in the way I have done on occasion on Saturday mornings throughout the year. Then you will all be invited to do the same and ask Roy questions with the emphasis on the question, not on the answer. Then we will split into small groups to discuss what Roy or generally would emerge, and then we will reconvene for plenary. That's the plan for the day. Now, I will introduce not Roy, you all know Roy, but I will only make 4 points. The first point is, which I said, this is a culmination of a particular way of organizing philosophical material to introduce people into philosophy, which places at the heart, at the core, the notion of question, as obviously Socrates introduced and Plato, but we at the school believe is the main thrust of philosophy. And the Socio emerges from the question. So the idea of the Socio is a culmination of a way of thinking that places at the heart the question, and Roy will introduce the Socio. Sorry about this noise. As ever, the second comment is philosophy has always been defined, amongst many other definitions, as the pursuit of first principles. There is some repetition in the idea of first principle because principle itself is first, etymologically. But it's not for nothing that the emphasis is on a constant search to try and get to the core, to that which is the foundation of all, which we, or Roy, will introduce the Socio to be. The third point, philosophy has always, we need to welcome 2 newcomers. Welcome, sit down, we haven't yet started, it's just introductions. You're welcome.
I've missed the explanation.
The third point, the fundamental concepts in philosophy share, in my opinion, 2 aspects that seem contradictory. On one hand, they go to the highest abstraction, and concepts like truth, reality, and so on enjoyed their duration or longevity because they are so abstract. At the same time, the search in philosophy has always been for something with 2 feet on the ground, concepts that derive or emerge from everyday life, concepts that appeal or speak to all people and speak to the variety or to the totality of our experience in life. And the Socio is no different. In fact, we are aiming at the Socio precisely because it contains within it these 2 aspects of the highest possible abstraction, and that which has tentacles in all aspects of life. My 4th point is simple. The pursuit of those concepts that mattered in philosophy, I believe, stemmed from a particular mindset, which I would call the philosophical mindset. People emerge, perhaps all people, perhaps some people more than others, with a knack, with a feeling that something is the way it is, or something shouldn't be the way it is, or whatever. And then philosophy is born in an attempt to articulate that spirit, that mindset. And various concepts throughout the history of philosophy, like mind and reason and spirit and being, various such concepts emerged in an attempt to articulate how the philosopher or a philosopher feels. And for instance, the concept of mind, as put on the table by Plato, emerged because Plato thought, I think, that the mind of the philosopher is different. And therefore, we ought to investigate what is mind in order to find in what way the mindset of a philosopher is different from the ordinary, if one can say such thing, or normal, or regular, or whatever mindset. Likewise, the concept of reason. The idea was that a philosopher is someone who abides by reason, who is disciplined enough, who wants to put everything through the test of reason, because philosophers felt that they can't help it. They ask questions because they find so much that goes on around them unreasonable. Likewise, the concept of life, I will not go on and on, just 3 examples, that the emphasis on life is emerging, especially during the Hellenistic period, but it is returning nowadays, was because philosophers felt that they live or ought to live or find themselves living differently from most people, that aspects of life that attract other people don't attract them. And so the Socio, all this is an introduction to the Socio. The Socio emerges, I suppose, so far, in my opinion, and Roy's opinion, obviously, as the best concept of all. It's not that the philosopher has a different mind. It's not that the philosopher leads a different life. It's not that the philosopher is more erudite or the philosopher is someone who is critical. It is the ability to resist the pull of the Socio. That the gist of it is, as Roy and I think, and other people, is that human beings have never been able to resist the pull of the Socio. That they came to, with such cliches as we are all social animals, no man is an island, it's all... the Socio has been the strongest pull on the human mind. I put it strongly on the table, far more than our nature, far more than how we think, far more than how we feel. We have simply come to obey the call of the Socio. So the Socio has been, I think, since philosophy began, presented itself as the biggest contrast for those who feel that they have a philosophical knack, namely that they are able to resist more easily. In fact, they find it tempting to resist the call of the Socio. With no further ado, I invite Roy to tell us a little more about this concept, which, as Roy will say, will occupy us more and more in our philosophical deliberations in the School of Questioning.
Thank you, John. Excuse me reading this. The ability to carry it in my mind, John's machine mind, isn't so strong these days. Even as we sit here today, something peculiar is happening in the world. While human aspiration stretches ever higher, mankind finds itself in the grip of something it cannot understand. A force with the power to take over the most intimate aspects of our lives has replaced reality. This force is the Socio. It's a simulacrum of reality, a pretend reality, if you like, shadowing it and pulling everything, including mind, along with it. Presenting itself as a comfortable buffer between people that promises to reduce pain, fear, vulnerability and risk, the Socio has taken on a life of its own. We do not relate, it relates through us. It amounts to a principle that controls our thinking. Joel mentioned the principle, something that seems to come first. Controls our thinking, emotions and moods. A form of symbiosis that fills the whole interpersonal space between people. From love between two people, upwards to cliques, crowds and mobs. It operates as a matrix that governs how we feel and act. We communicate only through it and according to its rules. The challenge is staggering. Imagine there is no love, compassion, care or altruism. Everything we claim we live for, but there is only the socio persuading us we need to think there is. That beneath these persuasive myths there is nothing. That is to say, there is simply the undifferentiated flow of reality. We will have found what we were put onto this earth for, namely to be real, and realise that we daily sell our souls for a pittance. We've rejected reality in all its wonderment for this syrupy, insubstantial phantom, and only because we've construed reality as unbearably harsh or impossible to conceive of. We've lost touch with reality by putting what the mind tells us about reality above reality itself. Taking our eye off reality means we've abdicated our freedom. Entities no longer stand on their own feet to make a clean contact with each other. We are both joined together and kept apart from others by this well-meaning barrier. Like when an anxious parent sees her children fighting and intervenes to stop reality happening, things never fully play out. We see problems everywhere, intervene preemptively, and draw in social workers, doctors and lawyers to soften the edges of what did not need softening in the first place. Our natural capabilities never get a chance to thrive. The socio is thus a response to this faltering in the face of reality. It notices when we reject our natural impulses, most obviously when we lose our nerve as we encounter another person. Our initial impulse is to engage with them, but then, inexplicably, we hesitate, compromise, or turn away. In this moment of fear, the socio steps in to convey a sense of certainty and security to our frayed nerves. It offers the promise of unity or perfection that holds couples and groups together. It then imposes a dictatorship of normality on any movement or unexpected event, categorizing everything according to the dictates of language and logic. Presenting itself as a buffer between people, it then assumes, as I've said, a life of its own. Its effect is to pull the world out of shape. Isms like communism, fanaticism or capitalism are as nothing compared to it. To a great extent, its power lies in its benign face. The socio is not a totally negative force. Indeed, it works towards human fulfillment, being associated with relationship, spirituality and art. Its closeness to our emancipation has probably allowed it to escape philosophical attention. So our task is not to expose a lethal force, but to identify and understand a very complex one. But the implications are truly shattering. Our parliamentary, legal, educational and medical systems are based on muddled thinking. A much more subtle approach to public affairs is called for. The process started with the birth of self-consciousness when mankind broke away from reality at the creation or the Big Bang. People became aware that they were thinking about themselves thinking. A world of separate selves seems to have appeared, claiming to have minds of their own. Instead of being carried along by the energy of the universe, each individual mind started to impose itself on the universe. Defending the boundary of the self from engulfment by other selves became the main purpose of the split mind. Searching for an identity seemed the only way to hold together what would otherwise be a flowing mass of energy, molecules, impulses and processes, which the individual mind conceives of as chaotic and unsafe. However, maintaining a separate identity and boundary is a tiring and lonely business, especially when another self-contained individual comes into one's space. Even worse if many appear. Aggregation, encounter and relationship create anxiety for self-regarding beings. The socio, ever sensitive to anxiety, enters at this point. Once entrenched, the socio is acutely difficult to dislodge. This is because it inserts itself as a third into all twosomes. The two individuals are unaware of this third, of course. This means, in effect, that as each of the two selves thinks about itself gazing out upon the other, they are each being watched by this third. And more than watched, the third is a cuckoo, bent on hollowing out the self and acting as if from inside it. If I apply this idea to love, the catchword of modern times, then we can see that love is the socio in disguise. Indeed, the world seems to turn on its axis because the socio propels it. Splits in our thinking are constantly opening doors for the socio to enter. The mind operates many complex feedback loops. When we look at another person, we see ourselves in them, but at the same time, we see ourselves observing them. Self-doubt grows and relationships fade. The pre-Socratics were alert to this phantom at the outset of philosophy. Thales' all is water, which I'm sure we all know, and Anaxagoras' concept of nous tell us that they were onto something. The famous one and many controversy of the pre-Socratics also reveals the many as the breeding ground of the socio. Here, multiplicities jostle for space and fear contact. And here the socio arises in answer to fear and panic. The world of the many is the world of fragmented reality, where we claim to have personal experiences, emotions and moods, selves cut out of reality as if from cloth. It's the daily world we inhabit of illusory boundaries between entities caused by the binary action of our minds. It deals in finitude, limitation, logical thinking, and binary splits that perhaps we would most associate with Aristotle. In the world of the many, our mind tells us we stand outside reality, observing it, rather than being immersed in it. It is in this world of conflicting singularities, selves, egos, personalities, and identities, then, that the socio thrives. But this world is an escape from unfractured totality, uncontaminated reality, as depicted by Parmenides in the concept of the one. Here, oneness or totality is infinite and timeless. Its origin and movement arise from within. No gap exists here for the socio to enter. This is the world that philosophy constantly promises to take us back to, but has so far failed to deliver. Few thinkers have dared truly to expose us to unadulterated reality, to throw us straight into the swimming pool. They preferred instead to investigate the mind that studies reality, to explain what it means to swim as we stand on the edge of the swimming pool. Yet, as I say, reality is totality. We cannot stand outside it other than by pretense. Reality just is. It is not limited to a function, as is mind. It doesn't allow compromise or fascination with bits or descriptive versions of it. Reality is everything there is, totality. But mind is, even though mind has a capacity only within it, it leads us to see otherwise. When a thinker compromises, and they all do at some point, they are telling us they have become ensnared in the contradictions of the binary world. Philosophers too, as all of us are said to do, live lives of quiet desperation. All succumb at some point. They are collegiate. They want to fit in and be accepted. They are ambitious, lonely, or lovelorn. Nietzsche said all philosophy is merely personal confession. More reason for us then to beware. Why be held back by Kant's belief that reason cannot take us to reality, or Wittgenstein's claim that our thinking is limited by language? The philosophical canon is not a place to tread unless you are well primed with acute skepticism. Yet when we courageously venture beyond these feedback loops of mind to the very heart of, say, love, we find nothing. No binding connection. Only another person standing innocently in front of us. We panicked over nothing. The socio is covering up nothing. If I generalize from this example to all aggregative connections, such as altruism, doing good works, or awareness-raising campaigns, then the whole structure of Western liberalism is revealed as based on nothing other than the phantasmagoria, become a silicone-enhanced enlargement of what stands in for nature. Take the example then, for one of many others, of ethics. One person confronts another. The socio immediately sees the gap between them as a problem to be solved, thinking they can't handle it alone. Remember my reference to an anxious parent a moment ago. It fills their mind with a pseudo sense of connectedness. But they now think of themselves as both separate from each other and joined together at the same time. It is now no longer clear when one person's interest stops and the other's starts. Ethics arises at this point to resolve an issue that only exists because of the intervention of the socio. The irony is there is no need for the socio. It's not bred in the bone. Humans are not ants programmed to act in particular ways. The socio doesn't occur across species or populations. It's not the outcome of biology, evolution, or adaptation. Indeed, it is doubtful whether human beings have any need of an organizing principle to mediate their relations with others at all. Kant tells us an individual being is already a complex multiplicity with the capacity to harmonize its internal parts. Is there any reason why internally complex organisms cannot replicate their harmonizing capacity externally? Dispensing with the socio must wait till mind resumes its natural, maybe its humble place in nature. Clearly, creations of the split mind, like self and individuality, and by extension the socio, are no more than claims to reality. We can't deny the fact that humanity has already clambered aboard reality and deposited its luggage of language and logic on top of reality's movement, flow, and process. Unfortunately, we are constantly told this human baggage is incontestable proof that we can only go so far and no further. Freud said a neurotic life was the best that most of us could expect. Well, one has to ask. Of course, we need socio-constructs like ethics and governments to keep life ticking over, but they do not constitute our limits. Today, we live in exciting times. Populism, social media, and robotics challenge old ways. They throw down a gauntlet. By going back to the drawing board, we'll see, for example, that language is not an absolute, that Wittgenstein places a limit on our search when he says this. Language, in fact, emerges in the mind when people come together. Philosophy's unremitting questioning of all claims to reality dares to ask the biggest question of them all. What is it that underlies all things? I'm suggesting here that it seems as if it's the socio. The first move is to free all entities from bondage, so they can relate authentically, if you like. And ironically, it is to the mind we must turn. When our minds expand to correspond to the point of correspondence with reality, we relate to others as part of a process we are involved in, rather than one we claim to look at from outside. We enter the nowhere place that Socrates found when he said that he knew nothing. His unbounded mind, free of knowledge the mind has created for itself, unhesitatingly encompassed all aspects of reality, including the splits perceived in the world of everyday life. You see where this is going? Now the process of freeing all entities to stand alone begins. Lover from beloved, perpetrator from victim, bully from bullied, and on it goes. Subject from predicate, cause from effect, all unnecessary couplings. As we uncover the socio, a new world beckons.
So thank you, Roy. It is conventional to contrast self with society, but you claim that the socio encompasses both self, both society and self. Can you say how the self is, if I understand correctly, nothing but the socio?
Yes, in a sense, it has to go. Everything is for me to go back to the relationship between mind and reality. If you take mind, if you're bored by this, I'm sorry, but some people have heard this before. But if reality is everything, nothing outside, no boundary, nothing beyond, and even if we were to say something beyond, it would embrace that, then we see mind only as a capacity within reality. But a capacity that, for reasons that are unclear, seems to have asserted itself and done a kind of breakaway, claiming to be, or at least represent, reality. Now, in that postmodernism says that we have personal minds. I have my ideas about everything that need have nothing to do with what your mind tells you have. But if we operate in this way, we will start to, the mind itself, the claim to a separate mind, will seek some protection against other claims to separate minds. And so the self begins to evolve as a structure, a fabrication that, in a sense, wants to hold the movement, the flow of reality still, so that it can assert itself. And of course, all the problems, if you like, start to evolve then.
Okay. I understand you to say that the socio has been able, over however many thousands of years, to colonize nearly every conceivable aspect of our lives. Are there any areas that still resist the socio that you can help us look into as our salvation?
Well, certainly, if you like nature, nature sometimes is just another word for the universal. But we usually associate nature with physicality, let's say, with bodies. And there is a sense in which the socio enters firstly or only through the mind, or the splitting of the mind. So if the mind were to return, not merely to the universe, but my mind would return to my body, in the way that Spinoza's monism describes it, then there is a sense that the body is anchored. It's not capable of such splitting, such bifurcation, such feedback loops, and all the strange games that mind plays. There is a sense, therefore, and this is part of some aspects of modern culture, if you like, the return to the body, the grounding of our sensibility, our thinking in the body. Society seems, though, to have still tried to escape that. In other words, society is still susceptible to the socio if body worship enters in place of simply grounding ourselves in the body.
It sounds perverse, I suppose, but you're saying that the triumph of capitalism and the rise of the individual, which has been achieved through so much struggle, ironically has enabled the socio to take over our lives even more. Is that so?
Yes. If you think of the Enlightenment, if you think of the rise of reason and the concomitant rise of the individual, then you have the makings of modern society, of course. I read society as simply an agglomeration, an aggregate of all of these claims to separate self or to individuality. And of course, once you go down that route, you start to sink or swim in the world of psychology, with its talk of individuation. The individual has to grow into their fullness as an individual, and so on. But fullness of what, when it's an artificial construct anyway? If you go back, as Joel, I think, was saying in his introduction, if you go back to Greek, or at least Hellenistic philosophy, and take up the idea that everything is there already. This is taking us back to reality being our base, not our mind. Everything is there already. So all the mind can do is observe. All the mind can do is, the mind comes as a second move, if you like. Reality is already there. The moment I think, the moment I speak, I've already, I've made a second move to reality. So I can claim to describe what's happening, I can claim to analyse it and so on. But I don't know if you know the idea of the sculptor carving an image out of marble. The Greeks would say the image is already in there, the human being, humanity, the mind, and all these aspects that are raised to such a peak after the Enlightenment. All the sculptor does is bring forth what is already there, does not create the image, the sculpture themselves. In other words, human beings, if they're going to make any move at all, it's to recognise their place in reality, not in the turmoils of the individual mind.
Thank you. That was just to whet the appetite. I don't want to take up more time. I would like to invite you all, as best you can. I must say, Roy